Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today it is time for a review of the new Beach Bunny album, Tunnel Vision. Tunnel Vision is the third album from the American indie rock band Beach Bunny, and I will admit that I did have very mixed expectations going into this album after I found their previous album, Emotional Creature, to be quite disappointing and very uninteresting, especially compared to their very solid debut album, Honeymoon. But their new album is finally here, and I'm very glad to see that if nothing else, they're definitely improving on their previous album, with Tunnel Vision just being generally a lot more interesting and a lot more happening than on Emotional Creature. And I think that while sonically there is a lot of evolution that is still to be done, with this album sounding very similar to a lot of the tracks on Honeymoon. However, what this album does do incredibly well, which is not really something that Beach Bunny have delved into before, is the absolutely amazing lyrics. With this album going for the very typical but very well done trope of happy sound but very dark lyrics, which if nothing else is definitely still a very welcomed form of evolution from the band, given the generally quite tame and almost generic lyrics of their previous two albums. The opening track, Mr. Predictable, just starts off being classic sounding Beach Bunny with the very light-hearted and summery sound. However, as I have already mentioned, the lyrics are of course much darker, with this track generally touching on themes of self-doubt and fear of change, which obviously is a huge departure from the typical lyrical themes we're used to seeing in their music. And then the following track, Big Pink Bubble, just continues this theme, with this really nice sounding guitar, these great vocal harmonies, but of course, when you look at the lyrics, you then see many themes including social isolation, and ironically enough, the frontwoman Lily Trifilio makes herself vulnerable on a track about fear of making yourself vulnerable. Chasm is sonically definitely one of the most unique tracks on the album, with these really beautiful vocals and especially the amazing guitar work that is just consistent for the whole song, as well as just the general song structure as well as being fantastic. And then moving over to looking at the lyrics of this track, we have themes of fear of the future and also having trust issues even with those that you love. But I do still like the slightly hopeful undertone that this track has overall, as we hear the future described as a chasm that I'll crawl out from. The title track, Tunnel Vision, again continues the absolutely amazing guitar work that we're hearing so far, but also lyrically has to be one of, if not maybe even the darkest song on the album, with the very consistent theme of self-doubt and still being completely unable to change your mindset no matter how hard you try, and just that feeling of hopelessness and inevitability when you just feel like you can't change no matter how much you want to. Clueless does almost feel like a bit of an interlude track, being a much calmer moment, but it's still nice to just provide the album with a little bit of diversity. And lyrically as well, I do actually find the song to be quite generic, with it just exploring the idea of reminiscing about the past and wanting to go back to a simpler time, which I do find to be a pretty overdone theme that's been done so many times in so many different songs, although it is still something that pretty much everyone can relate to in some way. Pixie Cut is an absolutely amazing track about not being able to turn your brain off no matter how hard you try. And I do love the metaphor that's used on this track, this idea of giving your brain a haircut, which I think is quite a playful way of presenting such a serious topic. And I also want to point out how much I appreciate the song for actually never using the phrase voices in my head, given that it's just the prime moment to use a line like that, and given how overdone it is, it's really become one of my pet peeves in song lyrics, just using that line. And so I really do appreciate the song for not doing that, given that it would be the perfect time to use a song lyric like that. Vertigo is this really amazing, much more rock-leaning song with this much heavier guitar, this being one of the most prominent instruments for most of the song. And then the subtle licks that are played during the chorus, as well as the amazing outro, just all are absolutely amazing. Self-sabotage is the main theme of this song's lyrics. And I do also really like the analogy of the baggage in my mind and the metaphor of comparing it to seeing baggage being pushed around at an airport. I think that this track just uses that metaphor so much better than that one Lorde song, Secrets from a Girl Who's Seen It All from Solar Power, which just really makes me cringe. And luckily, this track I think just uses it so much better. The following two tracks, Violence and Just Around the Corner, I do really appreciate for them being much more focused on social commentary as opposed to internal struggles, which I think is just really good for diversifying the themes of the album's lyrics a little bit, but still being very important stuff to talk about and also very dark. Violence describes the world we live in a very brutal and worryingly accurate way, with mentions of our home being a landfill and our taxes being used to kill. And I think that the music goes along with this track quite well, definitely having a slightly darker tone to it. And Just Around the Corner paints this picture of someone who has consumed so much misinformation throughout their life, and how the internet has just completely ruined them, with there being pretty much nothing that you can do about it, with how much the government and big tech companies just push misinformation out. And then the closing track, Cycles, goes back to the more personal struggle side of things, being a song about putting on a brave face and always feeling like you're acting for people so that they don't actually know what you're feeling inside. Which I think there is the argument that it's a slightly overdone trope in lyrics, which I definitely do agree with. However, it still still a pretty timeless concept that pretty much everyone can relate to in some way. And the slight touches of synths and other electronic instruments on this track also sounds really good, being definitely quite a subtle touch that still shows them going for a sound that they've not really explored all that much before. And so while overall I think that this album does lack evolution sonically, which I think is a real shame because it does still show so many signs of still trying to explore new sounds and do more interesting things. I absolutely love this album's lyrics with how consistently amazing and dark but still worryingly accurate they are, whether it be themes of personal struggles or social commentary. It's pretty much all amazing. And it does go for one of my generally favorite things out there in the world of music, which is stuff that sounds really happy, but when you look at the lyrics, it's extremely dark. And so this album will get a 7 out of 10 from me. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.